I'm Matt at Nexus Baseball, and this is episode 6 of the Tommy John Epidemic. This series is a YouTube read of content from the book Plague of the Gods, an outsider's perspective on baseball's Tommy John epidemic, which is available now on Amazon. I decided to put this content on YouTube to make the material as accessible as possible. This series examines the science behind the most superhuman action the human body can produce, accelerating a baseball up to 100 miles per hour. Arm and shoulder injuries have been the bane of the baseball pitcher since the first overhand pitch was thrown. Without modern medical knowledge and little understanding of pitching mechanics, if an early era pitcher became injured, they would either let it heal, try something different, or retire altogether from the sport. Those that survived this process, due mainly to natural ability, became the stars of the pre-1920 dead ball era. Early stars like Christy Mathewson and Cy Young would frequently pitch well in excess of 300 innings a year, with both having long careers. Others were not so lucky, with the average age of retirement for a young pitcher throwing that number of innings in that era just 27 years of age. Dead ball pitchers, due to pitching to contact and not having to deal with home runs as frequently, most likely threw approximately 100 pitches per complete 9-inning game on average. This equates to only an average of approximately 11 pitches per frame. Even with those modest pitch counts, many careers were ended early due to injuries, primarily to the shoulder. With such low numbers of pitches per 9 innings, it is important to note that in terms of sheer workload, 400 innings a year would be approximately equivalent to 280 modern innings, purely based on pitches thrown. The live ball era began in 1920 and is known as such due to the change in the character of the baseball. With balls being regularly replaced, they maintained their firmness better and pitchers were no longer able to alter the baseball. This created less of an ability to pitch to contact, and combined with foul ball rule changes years prior, led to the immediate result of higher scoring games. For pitchers, this meant more pitches per batter and decreased innings pitched. 300 innings became the ceiling in most cases, in line with the same equivalent workload in terms of total pitches thrown from the previous era. Pitchers were not pitching less, they were pitching differently. Relief pitchers gained greater prominence on the pitching staff in the live ball era, as more pitchers were required to cover the more than 1,400 innings of the professional baseball season. Previously, 4 solid starters would have shouldered more than 3/4 of that load. The trend since this era has been further declining numbers of innings pitched. Previously, each pitcher could, with team monitoring for performance, set their own ceilings in terms of workload. Starting in the 1970s, in a response to a prominent rash of injuries to starting pitchers with high workloads, approaching that 300 innings level, the focus in injury prevention became general workload reduction. Key to the rationale for this reduction was the loss of several prominent members of the Los Angeles Dodgers pitching staff. This staff was worked hard due to their incredible success on the diamond, becoming some of the brightest stars of their era. Don Drysdale, the epitome of the workhorse 300-inning starting pitcher, had just retired in 1969, citing arm problems. 3 years earlier, Sandy Koufax, the brightest star of his era, had retired after years of arm troubles. In April of 1964, Koufax had felt something let go in his arm. Diagnosed with traumatic arthritis by team doctors, he played through the pain for 2 more seasons before calling it a career. Doctors had tried everything from drugs to ointments to save the left arm of God, that had suffered from inflammation, stiffness, and hemorrhages. Remarkably, Koufax continued to pitch over 300 innings in both 1965 and 1966 before retiring, citing that doctors had told him he could lose the use of his arm for the rest of his life if he continued. Not only had Koufax pitched many innings, he also threw a higher than average number of pitches per game, sometimes accumulating more than 160 pitches in a single game. Koufax's retirement was no small matter and brought pitching injuries into the public consciousness. Whereas Drysdale had retired quietly, Koufax's struggles with arm health and his overall media profile led to his circumstances being well covered in the press. The greatest pitcher of his generation had had his career end abruptly in its prime. This was in stark contrast to the health and success of the 5-man starting rotation of the 1969 Miracle Mets. The Mets that year had a fantastic young pitching staff that included Tom Seaver and Nolan Ryan, and had a policy of reduced workloads for young starters, sharing the workload among 5 starting pitchers. By the late 70s, the star members of the five-man Mets squad were still healthy, leading other teams to speculate that their career longevity might be related to their reduced workloads, particularly in their youth. In the following years, their comparative health became the nail in the coffin of the four-man rotation. This rationale worked in conjunction with the increased financial cost of premier pitching. Before retirement, Koufax had been the highest-paid pitcher in the game, making $130,000 a year in 1966. Lost time due to injury, therefore, became a bigger financial issue, and such high-level talent was difficult to replace. The ideal four-man rotation of four pitchers, each responsible for 280 innings, fell out of favor across baseball and was replaced by a five-man rotation, similar to that which the Mets had employed years earlier. This format quickly became the norm in baseball, with five men that could share the innings load and pitch an average of 224 innings, a reduction of 20%. Meanwhile, the science of the arm was about to take a quantum leap forward due to the work of Dr. Frank Jobe. Amid the 1974 season, 31-year-old Tommy John, a soft-throwing sinker ball pitcher for the Dodgers, went down with an apparent arm injury. Jobe, the team doctor at the time, identified John's injury as a damaged ulnar collateral ligament in his elbow. The ulnar collateral ligament, abbreviated as the UCL, is a triangular ligament made up of three parts that connect the bone of the upper arm, the humerus, with one of the two bones in the forearm, the ulna. The ligaments of the human body are connective tissues that provide the framework that holds the skeleton together under the pressures of the muscles that create human motion. The primary role of the UCL is the stability of the arm and to ensure the lower arm does not separate from the upper arm at rest and during motion. The UCL was poorly identified before the 1970s, with X-rays being the primary method of diagnostic measurement and rarely able to see ligament tissues with any clarity. This combined with its small size and injuries to the area being extremely uncommon and mostly limited to overhead athletes, such as javelin throwers and baseball pitchers, to make the UCL a source of relative mystery to the medical community. Indeed, damage to the UCL didn't inhibit one's life in any way unless they were performing overhead throwing, in which case the consequences became significant. This made research on a fix in little demand, except in those communities. Of greater focus was the more common injuries in pitching, such as rotator cuff issues, bone chips in the elbow, and forearm muscle tears. Tommy John's X-rays were clear enough that his ligament was diagnosed by Jobe as permanently damaged, having stretched, frayed, or torn to the point of no longer being able to stabilize his arm during the overhand throwing motion. This diagnosis would mean the end of John's career, but Jobe was tired of seeing pitchers' careers end prematurely and had an idea. He told John that there was an outside chance that he could save his elbow with an experimental procedure he had devised. He proposed a graft procedure that would replace his damaged UCL with a tendon in the forearm. While ligaments connect bones to bones, tendons anchor the muscles to bones, making them similar tissues. The tendon in question to be used was the palmaris longus. The muscle this tendon is attached to is thought to be anatomically inert and equivalent to the appendix of the forearm, not even existing in up to 20% of humans. Without an apparent use and possessing a tendon similar in size to the UCL, Jobe believed it to be a perfect candidate to replace the UCL. He had seen similar experiments around the same time with the ligaments of the knee, and although encouraged at the possibility, informed John very frankly that he believed the procedure to have only a 1% chance of success. Join me for episode 7 next week. Remember, if you like the content, please like and subscribe. Your support makes this work possible. Also, if you want to jump ahead, please consider picking up the book on Amazon from the link in the description below. See you next week.